Hello everyone, good afternoon, and also good morning, good evening to those joining us from different time zones. I'm Jyoti from PM Power Consulting and I'm your host for the webinar. Thank you for joining in. I welcome you all to Acumen, the webinar platform from PM Power to bring you experiential insights from the trenches. Every month we will have experts share their insights on topics to inspire you to accelerate your journey of delivery excellence. Our webinar topic for today is Secret Sauce for DevOps Success People, and we have with us two highly accomplished experts to share their insights on this topic. Mr. Raja Shanmugam, Chief People Officer at Happiest Minds Technologies. Raja has been in IT industry for over 27 years. He has successfully executed diverse roles, including internal audit, operations, and program management. Before co-founding Happiest Minds, he was the CEO of Mindtree Foundation, where he implemented challenging and innovative initiatives for persons with disabilities and primary education. Thank you, Raja, for joining us today. And joining him in conversation with Shiv, DevOps expert from PM Power Consulting, who has 37 years of experience in IT and software services. As an excellence coach, he has helped many organizations and teams on their agility journey. And as a DevOps evangelist, he provided guidance to many teams of enterprise architects, senior managers, delivery heads, and IT and development teams, in addition to curating conferences on DevOps-related topics. Thank you, Shiv, for joining us today. The webinar is expected to last about an hour. You can ask your questions anytime during the session through the live chat option. The experts will respond at the end, and when you will have time for Q&A. Please click on chat icon or press Alt-S to open chat window. We are all set now to begin the webinar, and I hand over the floor to Shiv.
Thank you, Jyoti. I want to set the context in terms of DevOps and today's session before I hand the floor over to Raja. I want to start with probably a situation that most of us would be familiar with, we definitely would have gone, where we face an upset or an angry user. User is upset because something is not as per the expectations in terms of the applications. Either they're not able to access, or it's very slow, or maybe there is some defect in terms of what is shown, or the transaction that they're performing to do is not going through and all that. So typically you get a request or you get a defect, a call to the support center. And then when you take it to the developer, this is a typical answer that you get saying, oh, it works on my machine. Now, why does this happen? It is not that the developer has not done the due diligence. It is not that the development team has not tested whatever is going out. But most of the time, the causes seem to be about not fully understanding the actual environment in which this application or solution will be experienced by the users. So sometimes these are the non-functional requirements. Sometimes it could be a misunderstood requirement or a limitation of technology. So while techniques like Agile approaches have helped accelerate the way software is developed faster, better, and all that, unless the complete experience for the user is taken into account and everything is designed with that in mind, we tend to miss things out. So that is where the DevOps movement started probably about 6-7 years ago, and has become something that is adopted by many organizations as a means of improving the ways of working. So for not only the context of this webinar, in terms of understanding DevOps, I'd like to propose that DevOps is more of a concept which deals with, among other things, not only the development, but also the operations and the services that are related. And it is not only about the developers and operations personnel working together, but the entire organization being aligned and integrated to deliver value to users as a steady flow. So this obviously includes the enabling functions also. It is not a specific methodology. It is not a tool that is going to give you DevOps. It is not one technique. While there are a lot of practices that have been borrowed or extended from the lean practices in manufacturing. It is essentially about ensuring a smooth flow, a steady flow of value, and reducing waste in the various steps in software development. So the objective is to reduce the time to value, for the users. So it is in this context.
Yeah, in order to do that, we normally will have to address all the three popular dimensions of people, process, and technology. Now, today, when you Google DevOps, you would find enough information and more in terms of the technologies available, the tools available, whether it is automating your development pipeline or the deployment pipeline and so on. And when it comes to processes also, you find a lot of practices that have become more mature as more and more teams have been adopting some of these practices, whether it is architectural practices like having a microservice based architecture, or having trunk based development as a development practice, your continuous deployment, etc. But among the three, the most ignored, or I would say the most misunderstood area has been in terms of people, because all these results will be possible only when you have people who are aligned, people who can create value for the customer together. When you look at the State of DevOps report for 2017, you will find that the top two are related to some people dimensions. The first being transformational leadership. It is not only the leaders, but how every individual in the value chain exhibits leadership and how it is transformational from an experience for the users. The second is about teams. How can teams balance the speed and quality? It is not about working on my machine, but then I'm just rolling out something. And also be able to deliver that on a steady state. Now, with this, I would like to hand over the stage to Raja. Okay. And over to you, Raja.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining. For those who are on the group, thank you, Jyoti, for the introduction. Before I start the session, or before my insights, a couple of disclaimers. I am not a DevOps expert. I have not managed any DevOps project successfully. But during my 30 years of experience, I have been part of quite a few cross-functional projects, very successful projects in different organizations of different sizes and different stages in life. So I'll bring some of those contexts into what I talk about. Also, another disclaimer or another confession is, till yesterday or day before, my understanding of DevOps was like most of you, that DevOps is an automated way of delivering code and infrastructure. The holistic view of looking at DevOps as a principle or a process which is beyond automation is something that I took over from the primer that I actually learned from PM Power. So again, some of the context I'll bring to this conversation is from that understanding. The interesting thing about DevOps, from what I have seen in the concept of DevOps, in the field of DevOps, is this is possibly one framework that brings in culture into the core engineering aspect of a process. Very rarely do you see this. Otherwise, you have a waterfall method and agile method, and how do you do this? How do you do ops? This is one area where I've seen culture being brought into the core comms framework of DevOps. So that itself brings the confidence and the understanding that the dimension of people is very, very critical in terms of making sure that the DevOps becomes successful as an overall deliverable. What does this mean? From an organizational point of view, it's not enough if you set up an overarching vision and a goal and say, okay, we have set up this goal, we have set up this overall higher purpose. But if at the functional level, there is no empathy, or there is no trust, or there is no shared understanding of what happens in different areas and different groups, or if the context is missing, the higher purpose will not finally become an outcome that the organization wants. To do that, we need to do quite a few things to ensure that these things, what we talked about in terms of empathy, trust, understanding, context, need to be built as part of the overall process. I'll give you an example in my own team. And I manage a team with groups from admin, with groups from people engagement, with groups from infrastructure, with groups from travel and immigration. Now, even today, with all this understanding, I would be very skeptical today to do ask somebody from the engagement team to go take over administration, or from the administration team to take over, even for a short while, the people engagement activity. Because the level of cross-functional understanding that exists is still so limited that the confidence that we have to say, okay, these groups can provide a very specific, immediate deliverable from this kind of activity is still low. You need to build a lot more infrastructure in terms of emotional infrastructure to make this happen. And that's something that we will talk about. This is again a graphic or a context that I've taken from the PM Power primer on DevOps. Essentially, the context here is for DevOps to work, the yellow oval in the middle has to become this strong point. If currently most organizations work in these layers, you have the infrastructure layer, you have the the enterprise, the delivery development layer, the endpoint management layer, and the user experience layer. Very often they are specialized functions. They are very demarcated areas of activity, and people possibly get together in a project. They deliver their activity, they deliver their aspects, and somebody puts them together, make sure that it goes off, and then next thing. Now, hopefully it goes off. Hopefully it goes off, or again, like the way you said, it works for me, it doesn't work for me. Now, in a DevOps kind of scenario, the expectation is all these groups come together and they seamlessly work as a unit. While they bring in their context of their functional expertise, they also bring in a certain level of synergy as an overall team and step in whenever there is required to make sure the entire stuff goes on. So that's the context in which, again, we will discuss this. Now, there are three aspects of people orientation that we will discuss going forward. One is from the individual perspective. The second is from the project manager perspective. Again, I like this icon from a project manager icon, because usually a project manager icon would be a hierarchical icon. One fellow will be on the top, he'll be sitting on 3 other people, and those 3 other people will be sitting on 10 other people. Right? So here, at least I see this where the project manager is in the center, a thick of things, and communication goes not just through him, but also the team is empowered to communicate among each other to deliver what we want. So that's one of the reasons why I chose this as a project manager graphic. And then the third context is about the organization. So what is the requirement, or what are the expectations from the individual space? What are the expectations from the project manager space? And what are some of the constructs? What are some of the organizational constructs, like structures, rewards, budgets, alignment, those kind of stuff? Because it's not enough if the individual is ready and the project manager is ready. If the enabling conditions, the fertility condition, the organization is not there, then even if I enable the individual and the project manager to be ready, they will only get frustrated. Right? So all these three have to come together to create a successful DevOps environment. Again, a small caveat. I am not intending to give you a lot of yarn or give you a lot of solutions and answers on what needs to be done. You will find that I'm throwing more questions than what you have. But the idea of this conversation is to start this thread, come up with what are some of the things that we think are critical factors, and some of the things we will possibly discuss in this forum, and maybe this conversation will continue in terms of coming up with a combined understanding, not just within this R group, but as a larger community of project managers, and see how this evolves over a period of time. So coming to the individual point of view, if DevOps is going to require a contiguous integration of people from different skill sets, people from different functional areas, one of the key questions that we need to ask is, how many of those who are not developers, who are called developers or engineers or coders, how many of them really know coding? Right? Because today, even at our education level, at a BSc computer science, or even at the, we are talking about infrastructure stream, computing stream, HR stream. So the demarcation or the silo building happens at the straight to the school level, right?
Yeah.
And we all become a very, very focused on what we do, and we have very little understanding of what happens across the wall, even within the organization.
Right.
Now, if that is the case, how do you expect somebody to have empathy to the person who's doing something else? Because only when I can walk in somebody's shoes, that's what empathy is all about, right? Walking in somebody's shoes. And interestingly, the corollary for the definition of empathy is if you have to walk in somebody else's shoes, you need to take off your own shoes first.
Yeah.
Right. So there is this requirement for me to have a fundamental understanding of what happens in the rest of the aspects of my DevOps team to be able to bring in that capacity to empathize with that other person. Even if somebody has been a coder in the initial stages of their life and they transferred into different functions, have they kept in touch with their capacity? Because what I knew as coding 10 years back is completely obsolete. Right? So I can't say, you know what, I did for Fortran coding when I was in college, so I know what is coding on. So how do I again bring in that empathy? How do that knowledge and capacity? Do we refresh? And even in an enabling function or a support function group, how often do we rigorously bring these people into training them on functional aspects in a structured way? Very often it is on the job, learn as you go, make mistakes, and we repeat. Every time somebody new comes, they'll repeat the same mistakes. Right? Both the organizational learning doesn't get transferred as formal inputs, nor do they get formal out. We attend conferences, we attend various other stuff. But from a training point of view, skill building point of view, a lot more that is required from a preparedness for a DevOps kind of a story. The second aspect is more outside the individual, but specifically from an individual centric. Very often, the kind of goals and objectives that I, as a non-coding person, bring to the table would be different from what a coder will have. A coder will have, or a developer will have, or an engineer will have something very specific to the project. There will be project deliverable, project goals, and he or she would be evaluated based on those outcomes. Whereas an IT professional, infra professional, so the person is working on the development environment, or as you said, let's say we bring in a marketing or a pre-sales person into this, or a BA into this. Very often their goals would be a little longer term. There will be annual goals at a different kind of a setup. Also, the moment, because of the functional demarcation, regardless of what we say, the functional person would report into the functional hierarchy. So who can control whose activity, who can drive whose deliverable becomes a conflict or a challenge in such an environment if you are not clear about what you are doing. Right? There are other very funny conflicts that could come up. If you, like you said, if I put a HR person into a project, if I'm the team member and I'm supposed to write your appraisal, right, or facilitate your appraisal, you are my boss. Now, how does this work? Because my functional requirement is to facilitate your appraisal, but I'm part of the project. So somehow this will have to figure out how to deal with that. Okay? So that's very, very broadly at an individual point of view. Now coming to the project manager point of view. Again, one caveat, what I'm talking about is based on my understanding of how project managers have been, what I've seen in my past experiences, current experiences. In every statement that I make has exception. There are some project managers who are still very hands-on, who actually do coding, who deliver. But I'm talking about predominant prevalence in the industry. Again, this could vary between how a outsourced service industry like ours works compared to a captive industry, how it works, compared to a startup company, how it works, compared to a product company, how it works. There could be nuances, there could be variation, but at a broad context level, very often I see project managers have become resource managers or schedule managers, right? Microsoft project oriented skill sets. And even if they want to, they have very little time or the energy or the ability to get into hands-on technology to be able to understand, thrive, and be part of the overall practice. Right? So that inherently brings in certain constraints in terms of how well you can bring the team together, how well you can drive the output, how well you can actually bring context into what is going on, even if you want to. So that is one. So based on this, what are the conduits, what are the avenues available for project managers to reskill themselves, continuously refresh themselves in these areas? I can share our own example. We have a wonderful technology training platform, online tool, plural site. Amazing uptake from the time we launched it. But I'm seeing for the last 8 months, 90-95% of all people who go there and reskill themselves, skilled all in the new digital technology areas, are all C1, C2s. Right? Very few project manager level, delivery manager level people have actually even opened their logins. So, right, so there is a challenge in terms of availability. There is a challenge in terms of inclination. There is a challenge in terms of need. Do I really need to do this if I have to do this? But if you have to go into the DevOps area, this is something we need to relook at how to deal with that. The third area, which from a project manager point of view is, at least from what I've seen in many of the services oriented companies, is there is a old Tamil song which says, "I don't have control over who my father was, and I don't have a control over who my child was." Right? It just happens. Right? Exactly what happens for a project manager. You don't have control over who comes to you. Right? Some operations person assigns somebody to you and say, "Okay, go deliver." Now you have to completely depend on that person's understanding of what the technology requirements, what the project requirements are, and then try to mold everybody who's coming to you, create that context, create the technology capability, build all this and deliver all this, and all this within yesterday. Okay. So that's a challenge that the project managers look. There is also, in a DevOps kind of environment, again, this is something that needs to evolve, possibly PM Power Consulting and organizations like yours are working on. What's the PM role in the context of DevOps compared to a traditional waterfall model or even an agile model? There are different contexts that you bring to this in terms of how this will work. And that's something that needs to evolve. And the project managers will have to understand and figure out how to then equip themselves towards getting there. In terms of time available, see, we are saying the DevOps requirement is about building trust, building empathy, building understanding, building context. But very often the project manager gets the team on the day after the project starts. And you have time pressure to jump in and start delivering the project right from the day one and the team comes into this thing. So how well can the project manager be equipped to set the context, bring the team together, understand the team well, understand this, all that are issues that need to be worked on. Okay. So that's from a project manager perspective. So going to the, okay. So can I move this to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay. So you guys will have to possibly move. Okay. Oops. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Shiv. So going to the organization context, how is the organization looking at goals? How is it getting cascaded? Today, if you look at most of the goals that get cascaded into the delivery organization, very often they are about code quality, very often they are about schedule metrics, very often they are about error rates, they are about resource loading, overruns and those kind of stuff. are these the metrics that the customer is interested in?
Usually the lagging metrics.
Right?
Yeah.
Are these the metrics that the customer would want to rate the company on? Then where is the gap in terms of creating a goal for the organization and the goal for the system? How is it getting defined? So that's one area where there is something we need to look at. The second thing is, within the organization, how do you acknowledge and how do you reward people? If you are wanting a system of shared goals, shared responsibilities, shared ownership, shared outcomes, are you also rewarding and acknowledging the activity on the floor against those? Or are you rewarding heroes?
Yeah.
Right? Or are you rewarding those knights in armor coming on a white horse and saving the day when there is a crisis, which possibly was created by him in the first place, right? And say, it's too good, he worked 36 hours continuously and then created this thing. Whereas a fellow who has been plugging away, doing the right things, getting everything on time, no fuss, would possibly go under the radar completely. Right? Where are and that's what you want. As a DevOps, you want things to happen smoothly in a certain way of thing, where the customer's disruption is least in terms of how to deliver. So how do you drive those? How do you give rewards? How do you acknowledge outcomes? How do you measure people in the process? And as an organization, very often what is culture? Culture is a set of norms and behavior that is accepted in a certain area. So each organization will have a different culture. So culture gets built based on what are you rewarding? Who are you treating as role models? Who are you celebrating? What are you celebrating? Right? And for example, if somebody says, I don't care whether you die or not, get this out tomorrow.
Yeah.
And treats people like dirt and make sure that the delivery will go short. Or and what do you do with that person? You still say, great guy, great delivery guy, customer is very happy with him, so he's our hero. Right. Or do you work with, you say, here is a guy who's empathetic, who still gets things done, right? Who still has, so who are the people in a balance? How do you deal with it? Because ultimately on a long-term basis, what is that you want to create? You want to create an environment that is conducive for these groups that work with empathy, trust, understanding, and shared context. Right? What do you communicate? The second part of the organizational constructs is, how do we communicate? What do we communicate? Do we just communicate some generic stories, or we come with clear data-oriented input so everybody understands the context, everybody understands what's happening in the organization, so I can get involved in the systems. Right? There is a poster I used to have in my college, which is, I must be a mushroom.
Oh,
okay. Because everybody keeps me in the dark and feed me with manure. That's not what we want in a DevOps environment. We want people to have all the context. We want people to have all the information, and we want people to have forthright, objective information, which is as straightforward as possible without all the sugar coating and all that kind of stuff. Also, we want the communication to be issue based. All conversations. When something happens, what's the first question do you ask? Who did it, or what happened?
Yeah.
Very often in organizations or political, the first question is who did it. Who can I hang first? Let me hang the fellow and then go solve the problem. Right? Then there won't be any risks. There won't be any risk taking. There won't be any action. People will generally drag their feet because you don't want to be the first guy to it. So, what is the kind of communication? What's a bias? Is a bias towards action and issues, or is a bias towards individuals? And is your communication all about customers and customer backward? What are you talking about? Or are you always talking about from inside? We are this, we are this, we are this. Or are you saying our customers are this, our customers are this? So then you change the orientation of what you want to talk about. So that's from a communication point. A big issue in the DevOps system is, if you are looking at embedding non-delivery teams into customer outcome teams, then your organizational budgeting and structure will undergo a massive change. Because today, the so-called support systems are all leverage systems. They are supposed to be a ratio, like I need one HR person for 500 people in the company, one IT person for 300 systems. Now, if you say that, no, IT guy has to be embedded into a delivery project, how many IT guys will get? Even if the person has to time slice, to be able to get the context of the project, context of the customer, context of the deliverable, he needs or she needs to spend more time than what you would spend just by configuring systems. And you need more from this person beyond just configuring systems. So the organization has to look at a big change from the organizational context is there are no more enabling functions. Everybody is a line function. There's only roles. Right? Everybody delivers customer value. You then budget for what is the overall sizing that you require and build that capacity in the organization. Because this whole concept about line function, support function, delivery function is all from factories. We had shop floors, we had lines, production lines, so line functions. Right? Then you had these managers and purchase guys sitting outside somewhere, so they are support functions and enabling functions. Right? When you are saying DevOps, or everybody jumps in to deliver something, where is a line, where is enabling? So those contexts have to change from an organizational point. Balancing the longer term vision and context of the organization to project requirements. Because very often we get focused on immediate short term delivery, cost, etc., and focus on things that are becoming band-aids rather than building the infrastructure to become a high-end DevOps kind of, because there's a lot of investment that needs to go in. There's a lot of effort that needs to go in, and there's a lot of patience that needs to be there to get the ROI for this. So a different kind of tenacity needs to be built in the organization from the leadership level. So these are the broad context from the issues that are required to be addressed from an organization perspective. Now, I've thrown a lot of questions, thrown a lot of, what if, are there answers, right? So one area where, or actually there are two industries or two organization, type of organizations where we can get answers from. One is armed forces. Right? I spent quite a lot of time with my brother-in-law, who is a retired colonel, to make sure what I'm saying is actually being done. This is not something that I thought of my head. Because I'm talking about army, somebody will shoot me if I say wrong things. So everybody goes through basic training. Right? You can't go into the field in front of the enemy and say, no, I am a truck driver. I don't know how to shoot the gun. Right? You need to know basics of fighting. You need to have basics of physical endurance. You need to have some basics of what you need to do. Everybody goes through the training. The Jawans go through the training at the Jawan level. The officer goes through the training at the officer level. But they go through the entire gamut, independent of whether you are in the gunnery section, whether in the artillery section, whether you are in the the missile section. You go through basics of. So in a IT industry context, everybody should know coding
and testing.
Yeah. So for me, coding and testing are not different. I consider testing as an integral part of the code. You just can't write and throw it into somebody's head, right? You have to also own the value of that, the quality of that code. Right? So to me, again, that dichotomy of coding and testing itself is a split that we create. Right? So that's one area where I see there's an example of an organization that is doing that. The second part is, it's not enough if you go through the initial training. The training continues. For example, even in the army, if I have to go through a promotion, I need to pass tests. I need to pass physical, I need to pass theory, I need to pass all that stuff. You need to actually go through that rigmarole every single step of the way. You don't get, okay, you have finished 5 years, you have been a great performer for the last 5 years. So for the AE rating so automatically promoted to general manager. Doesn't happen, right? Even from if you're a major, you have to go to a lieutenant colonel, go through the test. You fail the test, you are a lieutenant colonel. Be there. Yeah. Right? So there are no ifs and buts, because people's lives depend on it. So it is a way of life. And people are People are accepting that as a way of life, and they're willing to put them through. Today, if I go in my organization and say, okay, guys, from a PM to a delivery manager, I'll conduct a test for you. I don't know how many of them will stay back. So, so these are questions that we need to think about in terms of, because in a DevOps environment,
many times we also don't have clear descriptions of what a delivery manager
we have to
has
do that.
Yeah.
You have to spend a lot of time to do that, right? I'm not blaming them. They also are poor guys. They are piled on from different sides.
Right.
So no, anyway, let's not make this an empathy session or a crying on the shoulder session. At a broad level, we'll keep it at the DevOps session. So the other aspect is everybody does everything over a period of time. You know, Jawan does a kitchen duty, Jawan does a sentry duty. It's not just I'm an infantryman, I just carry the gun and keep shooting. There is, so you understand what happens in the organization. So once the basics are done, everybody understands the basics, then people actually go through specialized training. There are sniper training, there is the electronics training, there is a gunner. So all these are specific things. They're your functional experts. Right. You need those functional experts, but all of them also have the fundamental of what the organization is all about. And I can step in and do that fundamentals anytime. The other thing about the army is you live and you die together. Right? There is no you are together, you eat together. I mean, okay, there is an army mess, there is an officers mess and a thing mess. But when you are in the front, this is you are together. And you know the managers really take care of the individual responsibilities, the families. They ensure that everything for the individual is taken care of before their own needs are taken care of. And very often you will see the officer is the one who leads from the front and not say, okay, I'm sitting here, go shoot that fellow, get shot and come back. So the whole thing about trust, that we are in this together, that everybody will look at each other's back and we'll have each other's back and we'll support each other, gets built as a system, as a process. And this is repeated again and again and again and again as rehearsals. So it's not that suddenly they decide tomorrow we'll go to Kashmir and start fighting. The amount of time that a certain thing is done multiple times, you get into the muscle memory, right, of the whole group. So if one step, something happens, somebody gets shot in the middle, the whole process moves forward, irrespective of that team member drops off, because they have already rehearsed what happens if somebody falls. And that's the kind of readiness that the investment in training brings in. Right? Now, somebody may say, hey, you're talking about army. Army is not the same as industry. That is a non-commercial organization.
Plus, you'll find that command and control,
but the government gives funding. They don't have to worry about profitability. They don't have to worry about customer deliverable. They don't have to worry about funding. They're all taken care of. Right? But again, you have another industry, hotel industry, services industry, cutthroat industry, very cost-oriented industry.
High levels of attrition.
High levels of tension, because you are dealing with customers day in and day out on the thing. Exactly the same thing happens. In hotel industry, there is no hotel management for chefs, hotel management for front office, hotel management for housekeeping. There is one hotel management course. Everybody does that. And when you go as an intern, as a trainee in a hotel, you are rotated through every place. You have to change bed sheets. You have to clean toilets. You have to go to the kitchen. You have to do front office. You go through entire process as a trainee. Right? And that training continues as you go up in the hierarchy. A general manager of a factory also goes through training. He also goes through what happens to me, because the whole concept keeps changing. The industry keeps evolving. The technology keeps evolving. The services keep evolving. And if you are not doing it, you are lost. So that is there are industries, there are role models that are already available that can show us the way on how we can reorient ourselves into delivering this process. So how much more time we have?
How much more do you need?
Okay. No, last slide. I just want to make sure that we have time for questions. Yes. So to summarize, to filter out all that we talked about and bring it to a conclusion, to to create a DevOps successful environment, I think we need to rethink on how organizations are built. It's like, you know, now we are talking about digital natives in organizations, right? Mobile natives, digital natives. So we may have to look at DevOps natives as organization creations. What is the organizational structure that is required for a DevOps environment? So bringing in customer backwards rather than function forwards. Bringing in, you know, from the current thinking of production line and other aspects to agile clusters to create those entities that can work as entities. Again, the caveat is this is not for everybody. Not all organizations become DevOps. There are some organizations, because of the nature of the business they are in, nature of the industry they are in, nature of the customers they deal with, nature of the size they have, they may end up continuing to do what they're doing because that's the best way to deal with that aspect. But even there, considering the way the industry is moving, considering the way competition is moving, you know, suddenly the hotel industry now hit with Airbnb. Right? The taxi industry is hit with your Olas and Ubers. But they never knew this was coming. Right? So set industries also will have disruption. So it may be a good idea even for them to sort of create some clusters within this, let's say like an experimental groups, to figure out how these work and be ready when they need to change rather than suddenly being forced to change. And also bring in this concept of everybody needs to contribute. Everybody needs to understand what is going on. Not just the you know, people who are on the bench who needs to be trained. Everybody from the senior most person downwards need to go through refreshers, need to go through technology orientation, need to go through training. You know, you may not possibly ask me to go and become part of a project. I will possibly screw it up. But at least I'll have a context of what is happening, so we're able to then take the whole organization in a certain way. Right? And customer exposure, customer requirements to be exposed to individuals. Even today, when I see project initiation documents, project systems that are getting created when you create new projects, sometimes I don't see all that is defined in the statement of work included in the requirements at the creation of the project. So very often there is a big information loss from the time the sale was made to the customer. The contract was signed at a master services in terms of commitments and non-definables. To the time this SOW was created, to the time the project requirements were defined. We already lost 50% of the context. Right? How do you bring in the end customer context into the project environment? What are the systematic mechanisms to do it? How do you define that process? So that's very important if you have to get the DevOps successful.
This one will
I talked about continuous refresh, orientation goals, and budgets. The organization, that's what I said. When we do a DevOps native as an organizational construct, you will rethink what is a team structure, what is a budget, what is the staffing requirement of the output that you want to create. And that itself will recreate the kind of organizational constructs, organizational alignments that we want to create in that system. Okay. I think that's it. That's all I had to say. Again, to sort of reiterate, I think I should go on to my last slide, but that's okay. To reiterate, this is at a very, very high level in terms of what I understood, understand from DevOps, and where the people aspect of the organization meshes with the DevOps concept. And the caveat is, again, it's not that this is not a universal truth, or this is not a universal requirement. Not everybody is going to jump into DevOps tomorrow. Not all organizations need to get into DevOps. But if you are looking at getting into this on a serious term, these are things that are worthwhile considering and debating. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Raja. Before we go to questions, I had my own points and also some maybe additional questions or points on what you said. I like the way you started with saying that with your disclaimer. Okay. And in fact, for the audience, in case you're wondering, why is Raja talking on DevOps? We had a couple of conversations. One of the key things that we've been trying to do is to bring this awareness in organizations that value is created for the customer only by cross-functional teams. In fact, we have a question, we'll come to that from one of the participants. We're talking about not only the specialists, but we used to talk about T-shaped individuals who have the broad understanding, but then specialists in some. But we're also talking about E-shaped individuals. E-shaped individuals essentially are those who can also roll up their sleeves and then start doing some things. May not be as expertly as somebody else, but if it comes to that, they can probably step in, and then this multi-skilling and cross-functional sharing that can happen. The other thing which I also liked is your mushroom analogy. Okay, I think that is happening. Even the last one that you said about the project teams being in the dark about what is committed to the customer, because the sales team has a different focus. When they are in a hurry to kind of close a deal, whatever they want to do, then it's about something that has to be reflected on the team needs to have access, at least understand what the customers have. The role of the PM, not to get into the empathy part, but again, including your picture, when you say that it is about being there, but then letting the team also have channels of communication and then trying to adjust, like probably in the army. As you want to move ahead, at that point, you need to take some decisions, not always wait for somebody outside the team many times to come and do that. Finally, this thing about the collective experience and how is that getting harnessed by the teams and across the teams. Also I thought was interesting. Now, when it comes to DevOps, and you also mentioned that DevOps is not for everyone. Very true. DevOps, the way it is practiced today, when you talk about tools being used, or when you have a lot of agile teams now wanting to move to DevOps, when you say that agile handles a lot of ambiguity, again, there are these models that talk about what you call multi-speed IT. If your systems are not going to change, if your systems are fairly regulation bound, where anything that you do will have an inherent lead times, inherent approvals and so on, some of these are not probably going to give you the kind of benefits that you may get when there is a lot more ambiguity. So even in the hospitality industry, what I took away is that every customer interaction is an opportunity to innovate, an opportunity to make sure that, exactly. So while you have your standard operating procedure, you can't say that I will only be able to give you salad. Don't ask me about scrambled eggs. At least you should have a broad understanding. With that, I think we can look at some of the very interesting questions that we've been getting. There's one question from Vijay, who says, this is a new view on DevOps. HR in the DevOps project team. Why should HR or admin person be part of a project or team?
And this very, very valid point. So I'm trying to find a new job for myself, no, actually that's not the thing. The context will come based on what the project is all about. The idea of talking about an HR person or an admin person getting into a DevOps project is depending on what you're delivering to the customer. The DevOps can actually range from the simple current automated way of delivering code or dropping code to automated way of setting up development infrastructure, which is where the current level of automation DevOps is, to a larger context of what Shivguru was talking about, where DevOps becomes a way of delivering value to the customer at an early time, in a less disruptive way, in a smoother way, compared to what we have today. So if that is what it is, there could be projects where you may need to embed HR specialists to ensure that the project functions smoothly than having to wait for a corporate HR team to keep intervening. There are multiple things that will happen in a high tension, active projects where you need to constantly be on the alert for interpersonal issues, fatigue issues, crisis issues. Somebody needs to be around to deal with it on an ongoing basis and catch those issues before they become crisis, and then you end up into a problem with the project. And it may be a good idea to embed the HR professional into the team if it is really, really critical for a customer deliverable. So again, these are today, because we are not talking about a specific project, these are concepts, these are broad directions in terms of what can happen.
So if I may just extend this and ask you, for small teams or small organizations where the HR team is small, can this be extended? It is not just that the HR function is getting embedded there, but the functionality or the services provided by HR, which means that whether it is the project manager or somebody in the team is able to handle some of the issues that are normally considered as an HR issue, and I will just throw it to HR.
Absolutely. So the cross-functional training that we talked about works both ways. When I'm saying a HR guy needs to go and understand coding, I'm also saying the project manager should understand HR.
Absolutely.
So there are basics that need to be inculcated across all functions, right? So to that extent, the project manager will have the basics of what you're talking about to deal with what is required in the HR. Even today, we do that at a certain level. We teach people situational management, SL1, SL2, mindful managed leadership, all that we do. But we possibly can go a little more technical to get it to the next level. At the same time, in a project small organization, this can be time spliced. So a single HR person can be part of 3 or 4 projects. As much as what the bandwidth can allow. We can do that because you are not required to be there on a full-time basis, because you have a context switching problem there. You have there are 3 or 4 completely diverse problems. It's very difficult for the HR person to get into that kind of context. So we have to figure out how to deal with it. But it's a combination. You equip the manager to deal with basics of interpersonal issues and HR issues. And when things go a little, that is when you have the next person, part of the team, who's also supporting the project manager, who's also understanding what is going on, who drives those rest of the process in place.
So that probably answers the supplementary question that Vijay had in terms of, now, when you said army, everyone goes through basic training. So the question is, should everyone know coding?
So Vijay's question is asking, everyone goes through basic training, question mark. Vijay, yes. In fact, that is exactly what I did last evening. I spoke to this colonel to make sure that I'm not making a stupid statement. I reconfirmed that I'm going to tell this. So is it okay if I tell this, or am I making an assumption that is wrong? He said, no, you are absolutely right. Please go ahead and say this. You are right. And then he also made a statement. Even if you are wrong, you don't worry. I'll come with my gun and support you. But
so we need to just coordinate.
No, but this I validated. Yes.
So the question is, is it applicable to support functions like HR, admin, finance? Should everyone know coding?
I think it's a you can say it is completely out of the left field, but yes, I believe we have compartmentalized our functions to such a high level. We have lost understanding and context of what the other parts of the organization. I have had my own team coming and saying, "What do they do, sir? Why should they behave like this, sir?" So I had to explain to them what they do, what are the challenges they go through, how do they deal with customer issues, what are the so sometimes what happens is, if you don't know the context, so some of these conversations could become entitlement conversations. Some of these conversations could become ego conversations, because you are missing the actual problem and you're only looking at the communication of the message. To do that, if somebody understands what goes on in that person's life, plus in today's world, everything is getting digital. I cannot be a functional guy without understanding digital, without understanding technology. Right? The more you are comfortable dealing with code, dealing with systems, dealing with things, the more productive, the more valuable you are to the organization. The old story of, I'm doing my work, I'm setting up hotel bookings, I'm setting up transportation, so I'm a good admin, or saying, I'm doing appraisal conversations, I'm doing conflict management, so why should I know computers? That is beginning to become even in the project management category, the entire layer of delivery management is becoming obsolete. Right? This, we had this 3 or 4 layers in the delivery hierarchy. Today, more and more the focus is you are either on the technology side or on the customer side. You are in touch with the customer or you are in touch with technology. So if you are not doing either, you are in trouble. Right?
In fact, that fits in very well with the DevOps approach. When you talk about lean, talking about value stream mapping, are you adding value to your customers directly or supporting someone who is directly adding value? Yeah. Okay. I think we probably have time for one more quick question from Gauri. It's a little more, I guess, philosophical. It needs more time. We'll see if we can quickly look at that.
My question is?
It says that there are 2 schools of thoughts when it comes to optimization and performance. One is don't over-optimize. 2, consider production environment setup. So while agile approaches normally optimization comes up late in cycle. My question is, how DevOps supports one school of thought over other? Okay, I guess I'll take it. Yeah. Okay.
This is not my portion.
Yeah. This is fine. Now this is also one of the. I would say when you say don't over-optimize, I guess that goes for everything. Don't do things that are probably not required at that point of time. This is that whole just-in-time kind of a concept. But at the same time, agile approaches do not mean that you create things that are inefficient. Okay. With DevOps, all that you are looking at is the production environment, what may work on your machine, like we started. Is it valid or is it viable? Is it justifiable in terms of cost? You can always say, I can scale my infrastructure, but is it worth it? So you have to look at those things into account, and constantly teams will be what is called refactoring. The technical debt that they incur is something that they need to be aware of, which is what kind of degrades the entire system over time. So the DevOps thinking, if you apply the lean thinking, essentially helps you, one, optimize your performance optimally. Okay? And when it comes to production environment, that is kind of built in right from the customer requirements to what is going to be the deployment environment. I think we are probably running pretty much out of time. There are a few more questions. All these questions, we will answer them in a post the webinar, either through mail, or we will share an update with everyone. And yeah, before closing, maybe just one question. It says, is not self-organization an ingredient in the sauce? Yeah, you want to take that? You talked about people, talked about teams self-organizing. Maybe just 30 seconds.
Okay.
You talked about being mindful and then the teams being.
So he's talking about does the team become a self-organizing entity? Yeah. Which is in a way what will happen when you have the context, when you have the mutual shared understanding, when you have the shared purpose as an organization. Over a period of time, as you work together, hierarchy vanishes. Everything becomes a role, and the organization, the team starts rallying around each other, right? And that's when you will find that, okay, today this has to be done. Okay, this is the way we will do it. And there is then the SOP becomes only something that you refer when something terribly goes off. Otherwise, the team becomes a self-correcting, self-organizing, self-driving mechanism, because the motive that drives the organization is the purpose, and the juice that keeps it going is the camaraderie, the empathy, the understanding that you build will lubricate it and will keep it going. And obviously, I mean, this can't happen without the skill set that you create. If I don't create the basic capacity to deliver it, all this is useless stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, wonderfully put. So I wanted to add this slide as a thing saying DevOps is a continuum. These things have to be happening constantly, the teams organizing, adjusting, and so on. So with this, I think we already had questions. Let me hand it over back to Jyoti.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you, Shiv, for sharing valuable insights. And thank you all of you for joining this webinar. I hope you found the discussion insightful and value-adding. I also take this opportunity to thank speaker for joining us and sharing their experience and insights in exciting area of DevOps. After we close for the day, all of you will receive an email requesting your feedback on this webinar. Please do take a few minutes to share your responses which will help us to plan and execute better in our upcoming webinars. You will, yes, we can do that. We have received quite a number of questions. Yeah. Sure, yeah. Please do share if more questions you have, and our experts will get back to you. And yeah, you will also receive a link to the recordings of this webinar, which you can revisit anytime you wish. So, and yeah, our next webinar will be on December 13th on the theme of going digital in 2018. I hope you will be joining us again. You will receive an email with details in a couple of weeks. Thank you once again, and goodbye. Take care.
Thank you.